I am a licensed clinical psychologist, as Oksana has probably mentioned. I live and work in Iowa City, Iowa, which is about 4 hours west from Chicago. That might help people to locate in the middle of the country. But I was born and raised in the country of Hungary. And so English is my second language. And it is with special honor and joy that I get to be part of this program, thanks to the organizers, because I feel personally responsible and also very outraged at my country's inability to support Ukraine and the people of Ukraine. And I do apologize if you have had negative experiences. I know there are plenty of people who stand by Ukraine in my country. I'm not only a licensed psychologist, I'm also the director of a refugee counseling center here in Iowa City. I'm also in private practice, and I am an advanced candidate in psychoanalysis from the Chicago Center for Psychoanalysis. And tonight's lecture, I will be co-hosting with my wonderful graduate student, Janavy Pandia, who's earning her PhD in counseling psychology. And she is working for the Refugee Center as part of her clinical practicum hours. The title of our presentation is How to Respond to the Long-Term Impact of Exposure to Violence, War, Loss, and How to Foster Resilience in Children and Adolescents. It's a lot to talk about, only in an hour or so, but I also believe that you probably know quite a lot about this topic already, but we'll hope that we can add something useful or new to your knowledge. I wanted to share this picture with all of you because this is a poster that the city of Iowa City has created at the time when the war started. And they were giving it out to the private businesses, to the public institutions for people to put in their windows. I'm sorry?
Ми не бачимо презентацію.
I'm not.
We can see your presentation.
Okay. Yes. I'm so sorry. Let me see what I can do. Oksana, did you let me be the host? Yes. So how about now? Does it work now?
Да. Зараз працює.
Yes? All right. I'm so sorry. Okay. So this was the slide I was trying to talk about, which actually has this poster, if you can see it. So this is a poster that the city government of Iowa City has created in support of Ukraine back last February when the war started. People have this poster in their shop windows and public and private offices and on their doors, encouraging people to pay attention and to contribute and support Ukraine. And this sign has been on my window as well, in my private practice office. I thought you would find it interesting to know that this is how our city responds. I wanted to start my piece of the presentation by sharing a small piece of poetry. It wasn't written for the occasion of Ukraine, but it was written for the occasion of human suffering. And it's called Gunpowder by Jean Wycliffe. As you can probably imagine, this is difficult to translate poetry from one language to another. So I really appreciate our interpreters that they're going to try to do their best. So the poem goes, I asked my mother, why do you cry? She said, your brother he just died. While I told him not to go outside, he said he had to fight for his country's right. But don't you know that, my mother, don't you know that we can't stop the violence? No, because the war is not over until you can feel love, peace, and hear silence. I think that this is a good introduction to the elements of human suffering and how one can create safety and peace inside when the war is raging on the outside. So in light of this poem, I wanted to introduce my understanding of what trauma is. So the word trauma comes in the European languages. It originates from the Greek language wound. It means a wound on the body or a wound in the human mind. I think it helps people to think about it when we often just use the word trauma, really allows us to sink in and remember what that means. Freud, Sigmund Freud, is one of the many philosophers of human existence and a medical doctor and a psychoanalyst, defined events as traumatic as those events when any stimuli from the outside world, which are powerful enough to break to the psychological protective shield of the individual, do emerge. In these cases, there will be no longer any possibility of preventing the mental apparatus from being flooded with large amounts of stimulus which have broken in. Later in 1926, Freud also added that the essence of the traumatic situation is the experience of helplessness on the part of the ego, which is suddenly overwhelmed by fear. War and community violence is a source of external human-caused trauma, which can also be referred to as societal, historical, generational trauma. Large communal or national events like the Holodomor, Holocaust, wars belong to this category. These are differentiated from developmental trauma in early childhood or other forms of interpersonal traumas or accidents or natural disasters. War is such a violation of social contract of civilization that it is too terrible to utter its effects out loud. This is the meaning of unspeakable and unthinkable crimes and events. Always a human wanting to forget the atrocities and also the will to remember, to express rage and sadness over the atrocities and the losses, which creates a central dialectic of psychological trauma. Too often, societies, families, and the individual, and of course, the perpetrators, will choose silence. And so these events do not surface as verbalized memories, but as psychological symptoms, such as hyperarousal, intrusive thoughts, constrictions, emotional numbing, dissociation, repression, denial, and many somatic or medical symptoms. Traumatic events are extraordinary, not because they happen rarely, but because they overwhelm the ordinary human system adaptations to life. They involve threats to life or bodily integrity or close encounter with violence and death. These experiences often create a sense of helplessness, intense fear, loss of control, and threat of annihilation. These traumatic events produce lasting changes in physiological arousal, emotion regulation, cognition, and memory, all crucial for education, learning, and social relationships. So how does war and community violence become traumatizing? Smith, a researcher, claims that the most important variables that determine the impacts of war on children's mental health are the deprivation of basic resources, such as shelter, water, food, schools, healthcare. Also, the disrupted family relationships due to loss or separation or displacement, stigma and discrimination, which impacts the person's identity or sense of identity, a pessimistic outlook, the persistent feeling of loss and grief, the inability to see the brighter future, as well as experiences of actual physical injuries, personal losses, and the normalization of violence. War and community violence creates a special state in the survivor's mind, one that is commonly known to have been created by the break in social order, the loss of faith in the order of human existence. It is a loss of basic trust in life. Traumatic events overwhelm the societal system of care that usually gives people a sense of control over their safety, provide them with connection to humanity, and give life a meaning. They breach the attachment of family, friends, and community, and the sense of self. They undermine the person's faith in a natural or divine order and can push the person into existential crises, hopelessness, and may lead to rage and destruction. These events hence not only damage the person's individual attachment to his or her own experience of self, to his or her own family and friends, but also to community, nation, and humanity, and those of the living. Such disconnection can further create a sense of conviction that nothing matters anymore, as the survivor feels already dead. Additionally, when young people feel cut off from those, such as lost loved ones, friends, family, teachers, and community, who can help them to return to the task of making meaning through connection, love, and concern, they can become disoriented and split off differing parts of their experiences. When children and adolescents do not feel that their elders, parents, teachers, and the government can protect them from harm, they experience overwhelming betrayal of their original sense of trust, the one developed very early in life by the caring and protective adults. Children and adolescents can feel abandoned, cheated by humanity, and experience an overwhelming sense of alienation, disconnection, which can permeate all of their social relationships. If the community has lost its power of emotional holding, symbolizing of concrete traumatic events, the human mind can easily get overwhelmed and turn to managing these mental states by emotional withdrawal, numbing, or other typical trauma responses to provide temporary relief from the harshness of reality. These are normal responses of a normal mind to abnormal events. These responses are not signs of madness or disease. So how do children and adolescents usually respond to trauma? The most natural response to violent and disturbing events is to banish them from our consciousness. However, these events become haunting memories, like that of the ghosts of the unburied people. Not wanting to remember these events will not make them disappear. They will just haunt our minds, our sleeps, and will make it even harder to adjust to a healthy life. According to the World Health Organization, who called for protection of all children in armed conflicts, about 10% of people who experience traumatic events will later have serious symptoms of trauma, while about another 10% will develop changes in behavior and psychological conditions that prevent them of functioning in everyday life. These are commonly known as anxiety symptoms, depression, or physiological psychosomatic problems. Exposure to extreme violence makes it hard for people to think. It makes it hard for teachers to teach, and it makes it hard for students to learn. One of the worst things about exposure to extreme violence is that it takes events that should be in the realm of fantasy, movies, dreams, children's games, and acts them out in the real world. When what should be imaginary becomes real, the world becomes unpredictable and terrorizing. Such events break the boundary between fantasy and reality, and with it, the way in which children learn to use metaphors for thinking. When events happen that are violent, such as war trauma, children and adolescents' capacity to make mental meaning of them becomes strained, especially if they're not held in this process by adults that could emotionally contain their fear, rage, and dread. One significant psychological result of ongoing conflict and violence is the decrease in capacity for symbol formation, use of metaphors, and self-reflective function among survivors. Symbols can represent real objects, but most often they represent abstractions. It involves the use of signs, symbols, concepts, and abstract relations evidenced by language, or the use of numeracy and artistic and ritual expressions. For example, the word numbers is a symbol for numbers as an abstraction. Symbol formation develops and helps with representational thinking, problem solving, taking someone else's perspective, and emotional regulation. It also helps to foster the capacity for imagination, hope, fantasy, planning, and dreaming as all requisites for problem solving and creating change. With decreased symbol formation, thinking, learning, and memory will suffer. Reflective functioning refers to the essential human capacity to understand behavior in light of underlying mental states and intentions, such as feelings, desires, wishes, goals, and attitudes of one's own and those of the others. Such skills are essential in building supportive social relationships and emotional regulation, which all serve as support against developing post-traumatic symptoms and increase resiliency. When these skills are delayed or decreased, people can suffer from short-term consequences of inattention and poor school performance, and longer-term consequences of concrete thinking and poor ability to master difficult interpersonal situations and difficulty modulating impulses, more likely than to act out impulsively what they cannot think about, what they cannot talk about, and what they cannot feel. When children have difficulty thinking, expressing their feelings, they can also behave what is considered badly at school. And when schools do not respond to these bad behaviors with empathy and from a trauma-informed stance, children and adolescents will feel that their school's repercussions or punishments are another form of confirmation of their own inner badness. Their emotional and cognitive limits will likely limit their ability to understand their lessons, furthering their frustration and their own negative views about themselves. Traumatized people also relive the atrocities, not only in their nightmares, in their emotions, and in their thoughts, but also in their actions. Many children and adolescents will act in ways that repeat aspects of the violence they have experienced in an attempt of trying to make meaning and gain a certain control over their own powerlessness of these past events. This leads them to act out what they cannot express in words. That is what is unspeakable. The injustice, the inhumanity, the cruelty, the violence, the suffering, all what is unbearable. For children and adolescents, this is often the best observed in their need of repetitive playing out of events or in their drawings. Compared to healthy children play, traumatic play is repetitive with the same characters and themes and have an obsessional pattern. And children may choose to act the role of the victim in their games or the role of the perpetrators as well. These plays are often difficult to stop. These plays are not symbolized, but they're very literal and concrete, and they lack the familiar ease, the lightness, and the joy of healthy children's plays. Adults and older adolescents can also experience a need to repeat the traumatic events. Some may reenact elements of the traumatic events even without knowing that is what they're doing. For example, some people put themselves in dangerous situations without the recognition of the real risks, or they tell and repeatedly retell aspects or fragments of such events. Restitution, healing, and integration requires the renewal of a sense of efficacy and power and faith in community and the human order. However, most people try to do everything to avoid remembering and re-experiencing traumatic terror, rage, or their hatred, which makes treatment and recovery challenging. Since neither the numbing and repressing or forgetting, nor the re-experiencing of the traumatic events can lead to a sense of integration and healing, the survivor is in need of a sense of balance between these two. Re-experiencing these states of minds on one's own is also potentially traumatizing for people, hence creating a self-perpetuating dilemma. Sometimes with time and some support, some survivors will experience fewer intrusive symptoms and may even look as if they had re-engaged with their past lives' activities, but many will experience the emotional numbing and emotional and social avoidance more predominantly. This is very common among children, and many will mistakenly assume that this is a sign of resilience in children. During war and violent misplacements, children often get separated from their primary caretakers, or the caretaker may suffer from conditions limiting their capacity to provide good enough nurturing in their children. Children who suffer from inadequate care from their primary caretaker, either because this person is not able to fulfill their role, such as illness, lack of resources, or because the parent is absent, will learn that one cannot depend on such parental care for physical or emotional well-being. In these situations, dependence on the mind and on thinking will often take the place of reliance on the good enough caretaking parent. These are also the children who are called wise children, or children who act, speak, and look older and wiser than their age. However, these children, once as adults, will report feelings of emptiness, disconnection, lack of joy, as if a part of themselves were dead, and also may engage in self-harming behaviors, suicidal ideations, or aggression. These experiences can also be common amongst older adolescents and adult survivors as well. Some of these symptoms, such as depression, suicidality, may be falsely attributed to the individual's personality because of their long-term presence in the person's life, but they are usually symptoms of early trauma. Children and adolescents are extremely vulnerable to these disorganizing experiences since they are not fully able to rely on a well-matured nervous system, social, emotional, and mental coping, and they need extra amount of support and care during these events. When, as part of healthy human development, adolescents turn toward their peer groups in order to differentiate themselves from their parents, the disappointment, sense of betrayal by their parents and adults and the leaders of their country can often feel more overwhelming and emotionally dysregulating than it feels to adults. For adolescents who are already facing the normal stages of coming of age, the challenges of adult life consequences, having to face war in addition, and violence and betrayal of the social order may prove extraordinarily difficult. Adolescents are the most likely to suffer the greatest stress, more likely to respond with social isolation, withdrawal, self-harm, a sense of nihilism, meaninglessness, overt risk-taking behaviors, and social aggression. All these behaviors, of course, are often the response to their disillusionment of society and community, and they also violate whatever social human order there is still left in their community. Such behaviors are often seen in their defiance of adults, teachers, a sense of hopelessness, a view of not having a future, in defiance of school orders, acting aggressively, or refusing to attend school. Adolescents will also struggle with the cognitive challenges due to the neurological impact of long-term traumatic stress, such as overstimulation, hypervigilance, memory and learning problems, which further increase their sense of hopelessness and anger, and eventual disillusionment in learning and school altogether. So how do adults, teachers, and parents and society usually see these responses by children and adolescents? War and violence breaks the moral code, destroys the symbolic order, and therefore the restoration of that order is essential to making life whole after violence. One of many unfortunate outcomes of the popular use of the term human trauma in the general language or the use of the words post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD is that the concept pathologizes what is a normal human response to abnormal circumstances. It trivializes the kind of horrors that the survivors have suffered. It focuses on what is wrong with the survivor as opposed to what wrongs have happened to the survivor who is now managing to live with these experiences to the healthiest capacity they can. It focuses on how to change, medicate, or control the survivor's emotional reactions to trauma instead of understanding them. In addition, and perhaps most problematically for children, there is an implication that the awareness of the traumas, war, and violence that disturb them should all just be forgotten, kept out of consciousness, and their current distress is something to grow out of, got over like the flu. It is often mistakenly believed that if children are young during the times of the trauma, they will forget them as they grow older, but this is not the case. There are no good ways of getting over trauma. Often the need not to remember will manifest in behaviors that are equally, if not more, painful to live with. When our emotions are not allowed to be expressed because of the fears of, what if I remember sad things and it will make things worse? Or what if others will be sad to hear me? Then we are stuck with having to deny our experiences, or we may end up blaming ourselves for not being able to protect ourselves better, or protect our loved ones better, or that we're not able to forget things faster. Unwelcome and violent thoughts can also come to our minds. Survivors then will feel badly and often also believe that they themselves are bad for having such terrible thoughts and feelings. There is another common phenomena among survivors. It's called survivor's guilt. People who have lost loved ones and they themselves either recovered from injury or managed to stay unharmed often develop an overwhelming sense of guilt over being the one who survived, while the others had to pay the ultimate price. This strong sense of guilt is even more pronounced amongst those who have witnessed the death or suffering of a loved one, but did not or could not help to save them. The sense of guilt can become psychologically a sense of self-torture, impacting the survivor's view of themselves, and they may cause an increased chance of the development of PTSD symptoms and an existential crisis, culminating in a certain need to punish oneself because of the guilt. This self-created punishment can manifest in many forms, from feeling that one is not worthy enough to stay alive, or that one needs to remain in painful situations, or cause self-harm in psychological or physical manner in order to repent. People can engage in various self-punishing behaviors while also believing that one does not deserve help, support, empathy, or even a future. In this way, it is easier to blame oneself as the bad one because it offers a temporary relief of the pain and anger. But of course, it limits our capacity to heal, but by not addressing those who are truly responsible for the suffering, and by not acknowledging our own helplessness in the face of such atrocities. While they are filled with pain and anger and feel rejected and misunderstood for having these emotions, many people will try to look for ways to numb the unbearable reality of their sufferings. This numbing can involve engaging carelessly in dangerous behaviors and the use of drugs, alcohol, or other self-harming behaviors. The risk when traumatic events cause psychological harm to survivors, there is also a risk of passing down the intergenerational impact of one's personal trauma to the next generation. If the survivor does not receive appropriate support and care in their recovery, this passing down process is what is known the intergenerational or cross-generational trauma, which happens not only in biological markers, such as in the changes of our DNA, but also in the ways the survivors treat themselves, their trauma, and their family members as a result of their unresolved trauma reactions. A person who never truly healed from or explored their own trauma may find it very difficult to provide emotional support to a family member who's also suffering from their own traumatic events. Sadly, many families cope with intergenerational trauma by employing two unhealthy coping mechanisms. One is denial, refusing to acknowledge the trauma happened, and the second is minimization, ignoring the impact of the trauma and making the traumatic experience appear smaller than what really is. The ways in which family members cope with this intergenerational trauma can set the precedents for younger generations. For example, a grandparent who refused to examine the impact of their trauma may be teaching their grandchildren unintentionally to ignore the impact of the children's trauma. There are many ways intergenerational trauma might affect families besides denial, such as emotional detachment and interpersonal distancing, impaired self-esteem stemming from minimization of the child's own life experiences in comparison to their parents or grandparents, a sense of estrangement amongst family members, neglecting those who depend on care, and also by forms of abuse or family violence. So what can a community do to heal trauma? Usually among the most important tasks of a society is helping children to bring that overwhelming frustration under control, moving it from something that they experienced as babies to something that now as children can play out, to something that they can harness for energy to do other pro-social things later in life as adolescents and adults. During and after a war or experienced community violence, these roles remain vital. Communities must think of engaging children and adolescents and their families and must not be afraid of the symbolic expressions of seemingly overwhelming emotions, such as rage, hate, fear, or grief. We all must welcome the use of the metaphorical and welcome their thoughts and dreams and nightmares in order to provide space to express what seems to be inexpressible, the experiences of inhumane treatment, suffering, and pain. Our responsibility is to rebuild trust in the moral and just world, while also help them acknowledge and accept that right now, horrible things are happening. Our task is to build small communities where their experiences are safe to be shared, validated, where they can be witnessed and empathized with. In these communities, they can safely remember and create memories of the overwhelming experiences. Remember, mourn, and create meaning from the violence they have witnessed. They can also learn from older generations about the importance of building hope, meaning, and purpose in life, despite or especially because their extraordinary difficult circumstances. Our presentation today is also an attempt in the service of recognizing and witnessing the suffering of the people of Ukraine, of all of you who are bravely fighting for your own lives and that of your students. In a community where people can remember their past, the times of peace, loved ones, and lost ones, and where people can rely on each other to continue to believe in the moral rights of the world and support each other in times when hope is unimaginable, the mind can stay sane against all chaos. As humanity has a rich history of violence, genocide, war, natural disasters, pandemics, death, and suffering have been universally a byproduct of being alive. We can all share in the universal truth that hope dies last in ourselves, and that as long as one has hope, community, and a purpose, survival and resilience is possible. Your roles as caring adults, teachers, parents will provide the necessary community support for young people to learn to make meaning, to keep looking for purpose, and keep fighting for what they believe in. Staying alive is a pure form of resistance. The use of Ukrainian language and other ethnic symbols and traditions not only express a sense of unity and belonging, but they also preserve hope in the face of meaninglessness, cruelty, and violence, and provide necessary protective elements for resilience and life, making space in the classroom and after the class time for students to use creative, expressive arts beside verbally expressing their emotions can provide a healing and supportive environment. Creating visual art, music, movement, dance, and all forms of creative expression of traumatic experiences will allow the human mind to symbolize the unspeakable, will aid in the process of mourning, and prevent the development of traumatic symptoms. These activities can become especially important for adolescents who feel they're too old to play and who often socially are anxious to speak, as they are at high risk of acting out the worst or most dissociated parts of their stories. They often find that putting these experiences into music, movement, as well as into creative writing, or even just keeping a diary, provides them with the symbolization and meaning-making process to heal. Another very important purpose for artistic and creative productions is the role that beauty and joy can bring to the human soul. Nothing can fight the meaningless, violent aspect of human destruction and suffering better than artistic expressions of creative production. They provide a moral alternative by giving us the values of beauty, aesthetic pleasure, joy, and love. And now I let my student Janvi continue.
Thank you. I am going to share my slides now, and I've been translating some of your questions, and we will be answering them shortly after the presentation. Okay. So firstly, again, I'm Janvi. I'm originally from India, and as Dr. Noemi said, me and many others in my country don't support the country's political decisions. We stand by Ukraine, and thus I am dedicated to do what I can in my ability to give support through my research and clinical practice as I work here with refugees. While we speak about trauma and resilience, as you already know, war has an impact on you. Kurapov and colleagues in 2022 speak about the impact of war on university students and personnel in Ukraine. They found that 98.7% people reported deterioration of their psycho-emotional status, including depression, loneliness, nervousness, and anger. As you can see the percentages of each of this as I speak. Yet there are a few people who also report that they don't have any impact of war. Before I go on to explain more things, I want to begin with an exercise. I want to invite you all to participate. It is completely voluntary, and you don't need to share your results or answers with anyone. This exercise has been used on Ukrainian participants by authors Natalia Kalka and colleagues when they studied resilience. The article titled Analysis of Peculiarities and Components of Resilience of People Facing Military Aggression Against Ukraine was published in 2022. If you're interested in participating, can you please bring 2 blank sheets of paper or any sheets of paper? If not, maybe some people also have opportunities to draw on the notes that they're taking. Once you have your sheets, and if you're participating, you have to place the sheets vertically and draw a person. I will give you a few minutes to do it, and please avoid drawing stick figures.
It seems, Janvi, that they are not able to see your screen. Can you
Okay.
specifically click on share, and then you can.
Yeah, I think you might have to stop sharing because I had shared my screen and it seems like people are unable to.
Okay, so let's see how I do that. I don't know.
There might be a red button.
Oh, I got it. Okay,
Yeah.
how's that?
Yeah, I started sharing, so I thought it will overtake. So these were the results that I was talking about for depression, anxiety, exhaustion, loneliness, nervousness, and even anger. Okay. Coming back to the exercise, if you have already drawn a person, I would like you to try drawing now a person in the rain. Again, I would encourage you to avoid drawing stick figures. Yeah, I'm going to move on to asking you now a few questions for the sake of time. You can think about these answers, or you can feel free to write it down wherever you have made the drawings. You don't have to share these with me or anyone else. So the first question is, how old is this person? Especially, I'm asking you questions about the person in the rain at this point. How does this person feel? What fears do they have? What do you think will happen to them in the future? What can a person do by themselves when they find themselves in the rain? I can see that some of you are already drawing, and sorry, for the sake of time, I have to keep this quicker. Is the rain perceived as a negative factor? Okay. Thanks for participating. Yeah, I can already see your answers. Thanks for sharing. I mean, and responding on video for those who are here. This is actually a projective test of personality, but for the purpose of this webinar, we are not using it for any interpretation. Since this test is just used as an arts-based technique here, I will only share the basics of understanding how to use this exercise. The first thing to see is, are both the people, the person on the blank sheet and the person in the rain, are both of them the same people? If so, what do you notice is different in them? Is the drawing placed at the bottom of your sheet? Is it placed on top? Is it placed on the left? Things like placing it on the bottom of the sheet might represent sadness, something which is on the extreme left, so maybe small. At the bottom might be sadness and loneliness. Things like having an umbrella or not having an umbrella could show resilience. And a lot of the answers that you gave to these questions, basically, a lot of these answers are what might be going on in a lot of your minds. The absence of any protection might also be anxiety or perception that the environment is hostile. But if you have a protection, it means that you might feel that you have something to protect you and you're able to cope. So there are lots of things, as many people here are not psychologists by training. You cannot use this exercise for diagnosis or interpretation, but it can help you use drawing, arts, and expression like these through your students to understand what they're struggling with or even their strengths. This can also open up a space for self-expression for students who might prefer communicating non-verbally, or just serve as an option to have a more in-depth discussion with them. As you are aware, writing poems, drawings, or even other means of art allows your students to express what they're feeling through their use of creativity. There are many writers who have written about living in war throughout human history in all cultures. For example, John Berryman, who was inspired by Irish poet W.B. Yeats and psychoanalysis that my supervisor, Dr. Noemí, is a candidate of, and even Shakespeare. I wonder if you know any poets or writers or any poems that you'd just like to share in the chat that we can come back to and I can just have a look at later, and maybe everybody can see if you particularly like a certain poetry, proverb, anything that describes the situation. Yeah. So I'm going to move on. Basically, what can teachers do to help increase their own and others' resilience? Dr. Noemí very beautifully described a lot of what is trauma and the response to it, and even what we can do as a society. I'm dealing with specifically what you can do as teachers. And I'm sure you have heard a lot of these in depth in different presentations. But I'm still touching upon basic things. The first thing I want to start with is to appreciate you. We need to pause and know that there's a lot that's going on right now, and we can sometimes just forget to appreciate ourselves. Because you also are in extreme stress and you're in the profession of helping students. So the first thing is to also appreciate your own hard work. And it's important to take that time out for yourselves. Otherwise, sometimes you have nothing left to give to others. If you've been on a plane, you may remember that when they give instructions in case of emergency, how to use the oxygen mask, they ask you to put it on yourself first before you help someone else, even if it's your own child. So it's very important that you first take care of your own self before you're also taking care of others. And if you're teachers, you can pause and also tell your students how much you appreciate them. I think appreciation is so okay, so needed, and it's okay to not be okay sometimes. So what happens, there are these three aspects of appreciation that you can see on this slide, which is appreciation, self-care, and self-compassion. Self-compassion includes understanding that we are human and it's okay to make mistakes. When we do good, we forget to appreciate ourselves a lot of times, but when we do bad, we criticize ourselves for sure. So I think it's so important to know that it's okay, we're human. It's okay to make mistakes. Secondly, it's important to be present in this moment. And third, to be kind. Be kind to yourself, not judgmental and evaluative. As a lot of people are also asking about, dealing with aggression with students that you're teaching and working with. So I'm sure it must be very difficult. So it's okay to take that time to pause. The next thing is resilience and how your small actions can make a big difference. I know that you're aware that you're making a huge difference, but it's important to realize, and this gives an idea of how much is the extent of the difference you're making in the lives of students. Basically, when you put your own oxygen masks on, you can see that you have the ability to foster resilience in students in many ways. Positive psychology is a strengths-based approach that studies human strengths and resilience. And this research has overturned a lot of assumptions about deficit-focused models of pervasive impact of trauma on development. While war can leave long-term impacts on development, school and teachers can be tremendously instrumental and helpful in helping students bounce back. This trait sometimes is characterized as ordinary magic by Maston, and it's called ordinary magic because researchers found that majority of the people are able to bounce back when they receive support. For example, Maston cites that in 1989, after Romania threw its dictatorship, 150,000 children were living in appalling conditions of state-run orphanages, and they had issues in IQ. They had stereotyped behavior like rocking, and they also had behavior issues like aggression, being hostile, and insecure attachment, which is basically inability to even trust sometimes. However, when they got some support, 70% of them showed spectacular improvements in 2 years. 35% of those 70 had no issues at all, and 35 had only 1 or 2 issues. So among the major factors that can help in building this resilience include your school environments and community support, and having supportive classrooms and teachers that are going through the same things. If you have any examples of resilience, I'm already seeing some things that have come up in the chat. Thank you for sharing those. if you have examples of how you work with resilience or how you help your students build a healthy classroom, please feel free to share those as well. I'm sure that will be very useful for other teachers to see, and also for us to appreciate the work that you do. The next thing I'm speaking about is creating a supportive classroom environment. Basically, it's important to allow spaces for students to express what goes on in their minds. Somebody asked a question earlier, which was also about what if people are unable to focus when there's so much sadness, like someone's father died or someone's father's lost or something's going on. It's sometimes, if your brain has so much emotions, because your emotional brain is behind, it's hard for a student to focus. So allowing a small space, and it doesn't need to be the entire class, maybe 5 minutes, or maybe a drawing activity that just allows some sort of emotional expression can be helpful. Bring what's going on in class, because a very natural response to trauma can be wanting to avoid it because it's scary. But research says otherwise. For example, a lot of people want to talk about suicide because they feel like if you talk about it, it's going to make it worse. But in fact, it's more helpful. However, it's important to realize that you are teachers and it can be out of the scope to have a lot of like a therapy kind of a space. So it's important to just keep it limited. And if there's, for example, if you're teaching and someone has an emotional response in class, you can do some grounding, like standing up, just a small exercise. Tell your students to stand up on the chair, sit back down, stand up again, sit back down, turn the lights on and off, clap their hands, something like that, which grounds them so that it's not emotionally flooding. Recognizing that it can be exhausting, it's important to pause and watch out for yourselves and your student. If you as teachers need a break, please take a break. I know it might be hard. I know that you have a lot. But again, constant stress can cause burnout. So it's okay to know, just like the oxygen mask. If you need your oxygen first. So I think ways to find time for your own self-care and break, and appreciation for being rather than doing. So a lot of time we use we reward an action. If they get good grades, we reward that. However, it's important to acknowledge that basing everything on just achievements can also be discouraging when someone is unable to achieve, and it's hard to achieve when there's a war going on. So conveying unconditional appreciation for students' self-worth, that we appreciate your efforts, we appreciate you unconditionally. It's okay if you got a lower grade in this. That can help them. A lot of time the fear is bringing that might make them lazy or might not, but that's generally not what happens. Sometimes people just need a break and they need to know that they're appreciated for who they are rather than always having to perform in difficult times. Okay. And yeah, just quickly, this is the last slide, and then I want to show you a song. So very quickly, therapy and support groups can be powerful. And I know that therapy can be difficult to access in times of war. So there can be support groups where it's an environment outside of a classroom, or maybe just students coming together, talking about what's going on, being together in this, and creating a healthy classroom environment where there is, like I said, more focus on appreciation for their beings. Now, quickly, before we go on to question and answers, I would like to end this presentation with a song that my brother and I wrote. It is an anti-war song inspired by a Gujarati poem and a prolific writer, Jhaved Chand Meghani. It's based on a conversation between siblings during a war. And we have kept the lyrics in Gujarati. I know that it's hard to translate songs. I'm sure you might enjoy still the visuals and the editing of the video, which is done by a very well-renowned director in India. His name is Rajiv Katpalia. So I'm going to play the song. And then we can go on to Q&A.
ગણ રે બોલે ને એ રાડ સાંભળે હે જી ગણ રે બોલે ને રણ સાંભળે ઓ જી
ઘણ રે બોલે ને એ રણ સાંભળે હોજી
બંધુડો બોલે ને વેનણ સાંભળે હોજી
When children ask, what do we say?
Will it stay or end someday?
It has been years, the hate goes on.
The ray of hope is gone too long. We're moving on day by day,
But we seem to have lost our way.
from stones to swords we've moved to guns.
Do we have to kill everyone? ઘણ રે બોલે ને એ રણ સાંભળે હોજી
બંધુડો બોલે ને વેનણ સાંભળે હોજી
ઘણ રે બોલે ને એ રણ સાંભળે હોજી ઘણ રે બોલે ને એ રણ સાંભળે હોજી
જળથળ પોકારે થર થરી કબરૂની જગ્યા રહી નવજરી ભીસો ભીસ ખાંભીઓ ખૂબ ભરી હાય તો એ તો પૂરહી નવચરી ભઠ્ઠિયું જલે રે બળતા પોરની હોજી હો ધમણ્યું ધમે રે ધખતા પોરની હોજી હોજી હોજી
Let's make a pact, you and I. No more us, or eye for an eye.
create a world where children play. No sounds of war, the music plays.
Thank you. And we're open to questions.
Дуже вам дякую, Ноемі і Джанві, за таку неймовірну презентацію, і вашу підтримку, за ваші слова підтримки, за таку чудову пісню. У нас насправді дуже було багато коментарів і питань під час презентації. Сподіваюся, що зараз ми зможемо їх всі обговорити. Я тоді буду зачитувати по черзі питання. Шановні учасники, якщо раптом я ваше запитання загубила, будь ласка, нагадайте тоді мені його ще раз, і я його прочитаю. Отже, перше запитання. Як ми можемо допомогти дітям, які під час війни втратили когось з батьків, або ж дітям, які залишились сиротами? Як слід поводити себе з такими дітьми?
Start. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So I can start. Again, first of all, I will never know what it's like to live in Ukraine and what it's like to be you and to work within your country and your culture and with the realities. I can share some of my expertise, but you're going to have to use it to the best you can in your circumstances. I am not a teacher, I am a psychologist. So I understand that your choices are more limited. You don't have the luxury of a peaceful conditions and have a private office where you can engage with children long term. So a lot of these are things that you're going to have to find ways to apply. But in general, and this is our purpose of our presentation, is to try to understand the general concepts and what is missing in people's lives, in children's lives during war. That might help you to apply that general theory to how to respond individually to each circumstance. And so if children are suffering from loss, of course, it is important to provide them with a space, physical space and emotional space where there can be an adult who's capable of listening and not being overwhelmed by what they're saying. So the children can feel that it's okay, that I can share the worst things about my feelings and I'm still going to be okay. And the adult with me can keep me safe. Even if the safety is only that you are witnessing their suffering, even if you cannot prevent the suffering outside of your relationship, you cannot stop the war. And this can be done creatively if you have exercises where children can relate to each other. I'm assuming there is often many children who have similar experiences. If they can have a weekly lesson where they can be together with an adult who can allow them to discuss these feelings, if they can have an assignment, let's say in the beginning of every morning, a child can take out a piece of paper, the whole class, and for themselves, they can write down what is bothering them yesterday or today in a way of creating some space, both physically and emotionally, so that they can express these thoughts and feelings. And again, providing the space, but also providing with limits. And if you feel that it's beyond your capacity, or if it's beyond the classroom capacity, if there is a way to provide them with ongoing support outside of the classroom, either by professionals or community members, those would be appropriate options.
Дякую.
Yeah, we can go on to more questions.
Добре, наступне питання. Чи є якісь методики викладання саме для дітей, які внаслідок війни почали регресувати в знаннях?
Mm-hmm. Well, it is expected that they will regress, and it is unfortunate. I think that I don't know necessarily the appropriate methods that your country uses in teaching, but I think what you can do is to normalize that a child may not be performing the way they used to perform, because there is a lot of stigma and children often make fun of each other, as we know. And so if you can provide a normalcy for these children and to really teach them at the point where they are, not to fight the regression, but to support the regression.
And I would just add to that with research, when there's a lot that's going on, I think taking very short breaks, but regular breaks between teaching, that would be really helpful to also keep the focus. And like I said, using some grounding techniques, because there's so much that is going on. So the short break could just be teaching for 15 minutes and then telling students to get up on their chairs, sit back down, using the opposite. So saying that if I tell you to get up, you have to sit down. If I tell you to sit down, you have to get up. That creates some laughter, humor, and some short breaks that may not necessarily help in bringing back the regression, but it can at least help with retaining more information in shorter durations of time, rather than teaching for 45 minutes and taking 15 minutes off. It would be better to teach for shorter 15 minutes, take 2 minutes off, 15 minutes and 2 minutes off.
Дякую. А що робити, якщо дитина після отриманої травми почала вести себе агресивно?
Well, that is the most burning question I know as a teacher or a parent or a community member. What do we do with children who need a lot of help, but they are also destructive, either self-destructive or they're hurting others? Again, this is a very big and open question. I think that if I wanted to give you professional advice, I would need to know the exact details. And that is something that you are able to do when you are facing a dilemma. Who is this child? What is my relationship with the child? How old they are? What are they doing? The number one concern, of course, is to keep everybody physically safe. The second concern is to engage the child in a way to calm them down so that they're not overwhelmed by their emotions. And then once they are calm is when they can listen. And that's when you can engage, depending on the child and depending on their age and their trauma, to talk about, we're very sorry that you're feeling so angry, but we can listen to what makes you angry. Again, it's very hard to approach with empathy when you're scared or when you're hurt, but you can take time to pause, keep people safe, wait for the calming down period, and then engaging with the child. And also treating children at any age as equal humans as we would like to be treated as adults, giving them respect, giving them the power to choose, which often victims don't have power to choose. Victims of wars don't have power to choose. And so people are very scared. And one of the ways to protect ourselves when we're scared is to fight. So children who are aggressive really are very scared as well. And it can take a while to get the child to get there, but I'm not sure if this is helpful.
Дякую. Якщо дитина після отриманої травми почала користуватися тим, що до неї добре ставляться, і робить спеціально так, щоб її жаліли, навіть якщо вона щось робить не так, які поради можна дати тут?
I don't think I understand if a child makes fun of empathy. Is that what you're saying, or?
No, I think they're trying to say that they know that now they're being treated with empathy, so misusing that power because they know that the teachers would be empathetic.
Oh, I see. Well, you still have to have consequences. Only because a person is traumatized, it doesn't mean that you let them do everything they want. You still have order. And as you probably know, if you have raised little children need boundaries. Adults need boundaries. Reasonable, flexible, empathetic, and caring boundaries. So it's good that they're receiving empathy, but they also have to respect the rules of the school or the rules of society. And you can come up with discipline that's appropriate if they're violating the rule that they're capable of respecting the rules, but they're choosing to violate it. And I know that can be a difficult difficult dilemma. But there is a difficult dilemma even in peacetime when you're trying to engage a child in their behavior. Yeah.
Дякую дуже. Наступне питання. Як допомогти дитині почати інтегруватися в суспільстві, якщо вона сприймає всіх як загрозу та агресує чи веде себе неадекватно?
So if the child feels that everyone else is a threat, yeah, I would like to understand why the child feels that, and where is the origin of that belief, because I'm sure it's coming from a very traumatic experience. Maybe they felt discriminated, maybe their loved ones were discriminated. But you're basically describing a child who has no trust in their community. So that is a very complex situation. I don't know if you have a specific example that might help us understand why a child would feel that way.
Дякую. Якщо є уточнення по цьому питанню, то можете, будь ласка, нижче написати нам конкретний приклад або ситуацію, яка пов'язана з цим прикладом. Наступне питання. Які конкретні дії вчителя допомагають дітям відновитися? Вчинки, алгоритми, якісь є готові, можливо, протоколи, які себе позитивно зарекомендували, і їх можемо перейняти? Я так від себе трошки додам, що там частково це ми згадували в презентації, так, Ноемі і Джанаві наводили приклади, можливо, ще щось додасте?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I understood what specific methods can be used to rejuvenate.
Yeah, I think it's in terms of the
Для
resilience, how
відновлення дітей. Відновлення.
sorry,
Так,
access to Oh, I think they're asking for materials, if we have access to specific materials.
I don't know if the interpreter can help us.
Я можу ще раз повторити питання, так? Отже, які конкретні дії вчителя допомагають дітям відновитися? Тобто це, можливо, якісь вправи, які ви б запропонували вже, там це було там зазначено малювання, можливо, через пісні, да, обговорення, дискусії, можливо, що ще додасте, або просто підсумуємо якось.
Thank you. Jami, do you want to go or?
You
can
can start.
All right. So I think that when you're discussing the question you raised, it's better to think about the theory than the specific examples, because you are all human thinking beings and you can apply theory in the given moment, in the given situation. We cannot give you an example for every life situation, but as long as you know what you're doing, you will know how to do it. For example, when we think about what is not happening in children's lives because of the war, the separation, and the suffering, you can try your best. You're not supposed to be perfect. Respectful environment, a place where they can be listened to, a place where they can express what they're gone through, and in a sense to give children the luxury to be children. Because as you know, war takes childhood from children, it takes even youth from the young ones, and it makes even the adults grow older much faster. So if you can create a space where it's safe for them to be silly, to be creative, to laugh, to believe in a future together, despite of the war outside the window. I think that is the main idea. And if you can listen to your own heart and see what helps you when you're suffering and try to engage with those activities. Children know when a person really genuinely cares, when a person genuinely is enjoying themselves. And that's the way, as a teacher, as a human being, that you can foster that kind of enjoyment by passing down what you enjoy, what helps you.
And just to add to that very quickly is sometimes we feel like we need to do a lot of things, and just by being there is also very, very supportive. So the fact that even you're teaching there is someone that they can go to listen to, a classroom, I think that itself is also a lot.
Дуже дякую. Наступне запитання, тут вже більш така конкретна ситуація. Учня загинув тато, і він прийде до школи. Дуже багато запитань. Як з ним поводитися, поговорити, можливо, з класним керівником, чи не треба з ним говорити, робити вигляд, що нічого не сталося, можливо, чогось не треба робити. Тобто, які б такі практичні поради ви могли б дати в цій ситуації?
So the father died and the child comes to school, is what you're saying? I didn't understand one word, but
Yeah, I think the father.
okay. 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 Yes. Jami, you want to go?
Yeah, I think I would just say you can just let them know separately that in case if you want to, that is in case if the child wants to come and talk with you outside of the class, that would be okay. That way the child feels that you acknowledge that, and if they want to come and speak with you, I think they can meet with you outside of class for a few minutes.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to talk with the child alone, as Janvi said, and let them know that you know that they experienced a loss, and ask them, how do they think they will function during the day if it's a recent loss, right? If it happened recently, what is it that they think they would need from you as the teacher? Also, you can ask, do you want us, the whole class, to remember your father? Do you want to talk about your father? So the whole point is to respect and encourage and invite the children into their destiny, their life, to give them power to say what feels right, what doesn't feel right. And you might find it very surprising that a child might want to talk about their father, stand up and talk. They might want to say, no, I don't want anyone to know. And of course, in the light of the process of mourning as a human condition, all religions teach us traditions about how to remember and how to let go and how to say goodbye. And eventually, we all humans have to somehow find a way to let go. So if a child is struggling with acknowledging the loss or struggling with letting go, that can be a sign for you as the teacher that the child is maybe in the stage of denial or resisting the process of letting go. But again, it depends on where the child is in that process. What is it that they feel comfortable doing?
Дякую, дуже дякую. Наступне питання стосовно ведення щоденників учнями під час війни. Чи не стануть ці записи майбутніми травмуючими сімейними спогадами?
Jimmy, do you want me to say?
No, I think you will be able to go.
So I think that we use the word trauma without necessarily fully understanding what it means. Sad and horrible things do not have to become traumatizing. They become so when our mind is unable to have a relationship to make meaning with the events. So if the person starts to write down their traumatic experiences, that's already a process for the mind to not be traumatized by the horrible event. The process of self-reflection, the process of being witnessed, even if you are the one who's witnessing yourself. It's a process towards healing. And in that way, finding the memories later will make people sad, very sad, and they will cry. They might scream in pain, but all of that is part of remembering and letting go. It's not going to traumatize a person because it's written down or because it's looked at.
In fact, it can be helpful to make meaning out and process the trauma.
One should not be forced to look at the diary. That's another problem, right? It's a choice, and it's important.
Дякую. Наступне питання. Які заходи були б ефективними, щоб допомогти учням сприйняти нового однокласника з числа переміщених осіб? Тобто, коли учень переїхав з іншої області під час війни, діти ставляться до учня вороже на основі його відмінності. Що робити з цим? Чи варто звертати якусь особливу увагу? Чи робити вигляд, що він такий, як усі, і нічого не робити?
Jamie, do you want to say something?
I can just say, I think research says that conflict can create a lot of divide, and it's natural for this reaction. But one way to deal with that is icebreakers, doing activities, helping students know each other's perspectives. So I think one easy way to start, or non-threatening way to start, would be doing small icebreakers so that you know each other, and also to know that even though someone may be from somewhere else, that they may not necessarily be bad. So I think start giving children that opportunity to know each other can reduce some of those prejudice and barriers. Also respecting that some children have faced a lot of trauma. So acknowledging that and allowing them to engage in some exercises to know each other can be helpful. And I think teachers can model that acceptance, and students also learn a lot from observing what their teachers are doing.
I'm going to say one more thing. Thank you, Janvi. Ignoring or pretending is already not a good thing to do. There is no reason to ignore. Reality is coming through the window in the rockets that they're hearing and seeing. They don't need another layer of denial or loss of betrayal. It is hard to be honest, but we must be honest. And once a child knows that you will tell them the truth, even if it's painful, that teaches them that painful things can be experienced. This is why you need to put on your mask first, so you can do this for the children. And so it is important to acknowledge when a child is alone and coming from a different region, maybe a different ethnicity or religion or race, to the classroom, to talk to that child. This will be difficult, and I'm sorry about that. But let me know if there's something I can help you with, and I will do my best to be here to support you and to encourage the rest of the classroom to see how we are much more alike, all of us, than different, because we're all much more human than otherwise. Our differences are really minor, and it's politicians who try to make us feel different from each other, but we are the same human beings.
Дуже вам дякую. У нас є наступне запитання, воно трошки схоже, тому я думаю, ми не будемо повторюватися. І перейдемо до наступного. Через війну діти зарано стали дорослими і наразі перестали вірити в добро, в дива, не бачать, що в них є майбутнє. Як повернути віру і надію на майбутнє?
Sorry, I think we didn't hear the English one.
Так, я ще раз повторю. Через війну діти зарано стали дорослими, наразі перестали вірити в добро, в дива, не бачать, що в них є майбутнє. Як повернути цю віру і надію на майбутнє?
Janavy?
No, you can start.
Okay.
That's a difficult
Um,
question.
I wish I had the golden answer. And the second hardest that I'm going to tell you is they're going to have to learn it from all of you, which means that you have to find it for yourselves first. You have to dig deep down inside yourself and your family and your culture and the art, the religion, the poetry, nature, anything that gives you hope in your own survival is the biggest gift you can give. It's the hardest gift as well. And I think that myself, having grown up in a Soviet dictatorship in Hungary, my family was very crucial in supporting my survival and talking to me about ways that one can be free and one can dream and pretend that things were not happening and that one day it will be all over. I think those are experiences I'm sure all of you can relate to. I'm only 47, so anyone who's older than 47 has experienced a lot of trauma already before this war. This is where our shared humanity comes into place, and encouraging by art, by joy, by being together, that you can survive and there is hope, and people have done this before and people have survived. And I think that is an important message for all of them to hear, that you are in this together. Lots of people have gone through this, and it is very sad. And you wish it wasn't happening, but you can survive it.
And just to add to that would be Viktor Frankl, who survived a concentration camp, said that when people find a why, they survive anyhow. So finding their own personal meaning that they can look forward to. In your case, it's education, pursuing something, looking forward to something that's meaningful to them, and why it's meaningful can also make the future hopeful. If there are writers, they want to be writers in the future and let the world know about what's happening in Ukraine. There could be someone who wants to be a doctor. I think finding those sense of meanings and fostering that, and that's why teachers are so important in helping to do that.
Дуже дякую. Наступний такий відгук. Дуже багато слів вдячності в чаті за вашу підтримку, за чудову пісню. Дякую за корисні знання та підтримуючи ставлення і атмосферу. Дуже нормалізуючим є почути, що хвилювання за своїх студентів, учнів мають багато колег, у яких також бувають хвилини розгубленості, які також не завжди знають, що робити, також продовжують навчатися і ділитися своїм досвідом, питаннями і переживаннями. Дуже вам дякую за це. І у нас також, знову ж таки, питання деякі повторюються, тому я зачитаю, якщо раптом відповідь вже повторювалась, просто скажіть про це. Діти вже двічі втрачали своє коло, спілкування і дім внаслідок війни, саме тому бояться втратити ще раз, тому не хочуть спілкуватися ні з ким близько. Що робити в такому випадку? Можливо, коротко.
So that is a very healthy response to trauma, right? Imagine if you touch something that burns your hand, then you don't want to touch it again. right? It's a normal response, but it's not a very long term. It's not a good response, because if we need to communicate with each other and we need to have relationships, that's what helps us survive, knowing that we're not alone. So even though the child may find it safe to cut themselves off from other people, unfortunately, there must be some ways that we can encourage these children to try to communicate. And I don't know, when you said communicate, is that they're not verbal or that they're not wanting to talk to people, but they are capable of producing speech. In any way, it is important not to let them be isolated, because that's one way to lose them psychologically, but to try to find ways to encourage them to participate. Even if they don't want to talk, they can be quiet, they can listen, they can feel that they're important. They can be invited to participate, not forced to participate, but not to forget them.
Дякую. Останнє запитання з чату. Джанаві вже відповідала частково. Питання, як допомогти підлітку, в якого не одна травма, а серія травм, наприклад, інвалідизація в молодшому шкільному віці, розлучення батьків, потім окупація рідного міста, вимушене переселення, і такий підліток повністю зневірився в майбутньому і не має надії.
Yeah, you're raising very, very difficult questions. Of course, ideally, what would be beneficial for such an adolescent is to find a psychotherapist who they can talk to on a regular basis. And I don't know if you have access to send children to psychologists.
I asked them that, and they said that the child is already going to a therapist. So
Okay.
I think
So that's good. You can take a deep breath. That's good. And then second, again, the same theory, which is acknowledging the pain. It's going to hurt your feelings too to acknowledge that, but we can share our pain and we feel less of it individually. Is to recognize all the things that have happened to them and still encourage them that there is going to be a future, and they can dream and imagine what can be better for them in the future. It is not easy, but that's the only way to live, is to have hope.
Дякую. У нас є ручка від пані Анастасії.
Добрий вечір. Хотіла, по-перше, подякувати за прекрасну зустріч, за змістовний матеріал. І в мене такі конкретні два питання. Я початківець психолог, і зараз мені доводиться працювати з травмою. Досвіду дуже мало, тому хотілося б почути, можливо, якусь пораду чи щось таке. Перше питання. Дівчинка 9 років травмована ще в дитинстві років 4, коли втратила маму. І зараз мама пішла з життя через повішення, скажімо так. Тобто вона сама вчинила самогубство, і дитина все це бачила. Вона ображена на свою маму, і зараз все рівно їй потрібна мама в житті, і вона шукає цю маму в будь-кому, вчителях, в якихось сусідах і решті. Як правильно налаштувати дитину на подальше майбутнє, щоб не було такої, травма все рівно залишиться, але як їй правильно допомогти їй пережити, і щоб не було оцієї прив'язки до найближчого оточення жінок, скажімо так. Бо зараз є в її житті мачуха, але зовсім в неї стосунки з нею не ладнаються.
First of all, hello. It's nice to speak with another psychologist. I want to tell you to please reach out to us, to me, or to Oksana, who is the program organizer, because I am in touch with many European as well as American psychologists who have been involved in providing free supervision for psychotherapists in the country of Ukraine. Some speak Ukrainian, some speak Russian, and some use interpreters. So I'd like you to get some professional ongoing support. You should not have to do this alone. Secondly, this child sounds like she sounds like she is in need of a lot of more support. As you know, that this loss is impacting her attachment. There is a huge sense of betrayal and loss that a young child has a very hard time making sense of. So it is normal that she's clinging to people just like a little animal would want to, cling to their mother's back, but the mother is missing. And so she's desperately looking for the mother in everyone. Again, it's important to provide a safe environment for her, and hopefully the new foster mother can create that for her, because that would be that person's role. I think as a therapist for her, it's important that you let her play and draw and talk, if she can, about the unspeakable loss of her mother. And it will take years, but by providing that space for her, she will process slowly something that is really unprocessable for a 4-year-old. And there will be a lot of playing out, probably what she has witnessed. And you as the adult has to be strong and not be scared of what she's going to be doing and showing. I wanted to tell Oksana, please, that we are going to have to stop in 5 minutes. And I'm sorry to say that because it seems that all of you have lots of wonderful questions. But we're going to have to stop at 50.
Так, звичайно, це вже було останнє питання. У нас також дуже багато слів вдячності. Я думаю, що Джанаві прочитала і потім поділиться. Шановні учасники, якщо у вас будуть додаткові запитання, будь ласка, пишіть їх на пошту ukraine@educationusa.org. Ми тоді передамо всі коментарі і запитання нашим спікерам. Дякую всім, що сьогодні приєдналися. Дякую Ноемі і Джанаві за чудову презентацію, пісню. Дуже багато відгуків вона отримала. І чекаємо вас наступного вівторка на новому вебінарі. Всім до побачення, гарного дня.
Thank you.